Hello everybody, what's up? You're listening to I Was Just Wondering with me, Tom Salmon, the show that dives into music, film and games, and everything else in between. My guest on this week's episode is Oliver Harper, a film critic, documentary filmmaker, and the creator and presenter of Oliver Harper's retrospectives and reviews on YouTube. We jumped into Oliver's early days of creating his film retrospectives, how he works with Hollywood distribution companies to clear copyright claims on his videos, and why he directed and co-edited his first feature-length documentary film, In Search of the Last Action Heroes. So if you're running, stuck in a traffic jam, or sitting behind a desk at work, hope you enjoy my interview with Oliver. For the people who haven't watched your YouTube channel, Oliver Harper's Retrospective and Reviews, who are you and what's the channel about?
I suppose I'm a documentary filmmaker now, after I had my documentary In Search of the Last Action Heroes released late last year. But before that, you could say I was sort of film critic and video editor, and I've been doing the whole YouTube thing since late 2011, and my reviews were essentially kind of mini documentaries themselves, kind of retrospectively looking back at movies from the 80s and 90s, mainly because those were the films I grew up watching. So it's a whole YouTube channel based around nostalgia, and nostalgia is a powerful tool. So and it seems to seems to be the most popular thing when it comes to YouTube.
Watching your first retrospective video, which was on Superman 4, which you posted in 2011, what do you remember about sitting down for the first time to actually work on that first video?
I suppose at the time when I started to do this, because it was obviously always with these things, it always starts out as a hobby, because I'd left my job as a sort of projectionist. I got made redundant. It changed because the industry was changing from 35mm film to digital projection. So I kind of got made redundant from that, and I thought, what am I going to do? And at the time, obviously, I was like many people who start out on YouTube. You're often inspired by other people doing something on the platform, or kind of seeing stuff that's around you, and to sort of take ideas from, so to speak. And YouTube itself was kind of dominated by the angry reviews, So James Rolfe obviously became extremely popular through his angry video game nerd character, and people started basically copying that format. So what you had online was people doing angry reviews on movies and video games, or TV shows, I suppose. So my approach was something a bit different, because I always loved the special features on movies like that came with Laserdiscs and obviously DVDs, then eventually Blu-rays. When nowadays kind of special features really are becoming a sort of niche thing, where they'd be part of like Arrow film label or the Shout Factory releases, where they actually put time and effort in, where studios don't really do that much anymore. But at the time, I was obsessed with the Alien documentaries and all the all the sort of special features you'd find on things like Jurassic Park and so forth. So my approach was really to take something that was a critique on a movie and combine it with an educational aspect. So you had this kind of production information, talk about the special effects and the music, and in some cases talk about the video games, because obviously I grew up playing video games, but no one had really incorporated that aspect into reviewing a movie, because I was looking at it as retrospectively. I wanted to cover everything that was kind of around that film at the time. So you'd have reviews by other critics, such as Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, and then you had the toys and the merchandise that came with it. So it was combining everything all into one. And at the time, when I was doing it, I was all trial by error. It was all a learning experience, because how I talk now to how I talked then with my voiceovers, it was completely different. I was nervous kind of wreck doing it, or lacked the confidence to do a voiceover. And structurally, I hadn't really figured out how things were going to play out, but it was all just a bit of fun. And then as soon as I shared the video with a couple of friends, and then on some forums at the time, which you did, and it sort of got a lot of views, and people just wanted more. So I just continued that process until it became this something I could do or take seriously as a sort of career.
So at which point in terms of your retrospectives, which particular video was the sort of jumping off point of right, this can be a career and I can move forward with this?
It wasn't until about 2000 2014, perhaps, late 2014, where I was approached by a network and said, "Hey, we could monetize your work, so you could make some money out of this." At the time, it was a bit more problematic going through Google to sort of Google AdSense, and I think it was kind of easier to go through a network because you had all these kind of safety belts in place, I suppose. But nowadays, it's kind of pointless having a network. They just take a percentage of your money for doing nothing, So I do need to sort that out. So, but I don't think it was one particular video, Tom. It was kind of, well, I think once the views had got to a certain amount, you could sort of calculate how much you could earn, and then you think, oh, I could actually do this as a living wage, and I can pay rent, I can pay bills, and I can do other things like socialize or whatever, and not just be constantly worrying about, oh my God, how am I going to have to stop doing this and get a proper job, as people like to say. But anything's a job unless when you get paid for it. So, but no, it wasn't a particular video, but there was this sense that things were becoming like going in my favor, that I could do this. But I had to go. I had a difficult time trying to, because a lot of the videos, once I published them in 2011 to that point, some like copyright claims which hadn't been resolved, so they had a lot of high views on them. So I had to start working relationships, so to speak, with the studios by contacting their copyright departments, letting them know who I was, what I did, and showing them that what I was doing wasn't like a it wasn't going to affect their business in any way. It was actually going to help them. Like people would actually go watch the review and go, oh wow, I'll go buy that film or whatever. So they saw it as a kind of benefit for them. So that was really nice in a way. So a lot of the copyright claims got released on my site, so I could then do this for a living and not feel worried that something was going to crop up one day and bite me on the bum, with copyright claims.
There's the idea of like fair use as well, isn't there? And that's been quite a hot topic in terms of people making videos and other people's sort of like content. And I wonder if that's something, especially in the beginning, something you must have been very aware of that, I guess.
I was actually quite naive at the time when I started doing YouTube and getting these copyright claims. I was like, oh, what's this? And I kind of, I wasn't naive to the point where I was stupid and didn't know what it was, but it was like how you approach disputing the claims. That was where I was really naive. And I'd learned my lessons through that point on how to sort of speak to people in the right way to sort of make them understand, that it wasn't, I wasn't a problem to them, so to speak. But yeah, fair use definitely as US copyright law. Doesn't really account for UK. So UK is fair dealing, which is a lot more stricter. But in terms of copyright, how it's managed on the platform generally comes from the US divisions of these film studios. So you have to approach them generally. So yeah, I mean, you can always argue fair use if you feel you're right in your way to argue that. But if you just uploaded a bunch of clips, you haven't done anything to them, you have not provided a critique or anything like that, then you're not going to win any argument. I've had some people people upload entire movies, and I think someone at Universal Pictures told me like they tried to claim that was fair use, and I was like, what? You can't. Uploading a whole movie is not fair use. People are a tad uneducated on copyright and like to push the fact that they know a lot but don't actually know anything. So come making my documentary recently, the whole fair use process was really kind of a bit of an eye opener to sort of use film clips, for critique purposes, for a product that would sell on, digital and physical availability. So that was bit of a challenge, but we sort of managed to get it done and passed, and all good in terms of it getting insured.
Did you actually use clips from the film in the documentary, I'm assuming?
Oh yeah, so for example, they're talking about Rambo or Terminator, we've got clips from those movies. So you just have to make sure things are credited correctly and how long you use that clip for. You couldn't use one long clip for 30 seconds or whatever. You have to sort of make sure that you're using it in a limited way to make sure what you're talking about, whoever you are interviewing is talking about, that clip is used in the correct way.
And I just want to sort of like pick up on a little bit on so your most popular retrospective video that I looked up was Rambo First Blood. Just to jump in with you a little bit, why do you think that retrospective on that film and that character has remained so popular with viewers?
I suppose because Rambo really is a perfect example of an action hero, and the franchise has gone on since the early 80s till now, because we had a Rambo film out last year, which wasn't particularly good. It was, it was pretty good for its sort of action and violence, I suppose, but it wasn't really a Rambo film. It didn't feel like one. But it's interesting to see how the character has endured. It's a bit like Rocky as well. Rocky's still a popular character, and Stallone keeps bringing him back, and it still sells to an audience. And in terms of Rambo First Blood, which is still the best Rambo movie, it's interesting that the popularity of that video is probably down to the recent movie. I think what actually works in my favor sometimes is when I've reviewed a particular movie and then there's a sequel years later, or they reboot it, so people will end up just searching for the first movie or the one previously, and to sort of get a bit of a flavor to what the franchise or that character is about. So it works for me sometimes. For example, there's like when Bad Boys came out, I thought, well, you've got to time it. The third Bad Boys movie, time it with a retrospective on the first film, so things kind of, so there's an audience there at that point in time. But yeah, you have to sort of play your cards right, I suppose.
In terms of Sylvester Stallone's career and like Schwarzenegger, in terms of where you sit, because you had like Terminator Dark Fate, which was a return back to the sort of Terminator character again, and then Stallone coming back and doing Rambo again, and they were both maligned for very sort of like different reasons.
I suppose with Stallone, he always had more range than Arnold. He could do the sort of down and trodden character. He could, he's got those sort of, there's always those moments in his movies where he's got that sort of puppy dog eyes where you feel really sorry for him. And, you always get past, he always obviously criticized because of how he speaks and stuff. But he's an insanely intelligent man. And I think he's probably made more errors throughout his career than Arnold. Arnold knew when to sort of stop to a certain point with his career. He went to politics, but he chose his movies quite wisely. He's got a few mistakes during the 90s, like Junior and Batman and Robin and Jingle All the Way, which is kind of got a cult following, but it's a silly film. But Stallone himself, he continued actually doing those action movies and made a few, tried to do the comedy movies in the early 90s, but by come like 96 with like Daylight, and then he did have a sort of career resurgence, so to speak, with Copland, and then he came back with I See You, which was a massive bomb. And then he had like Failure After Failure, and then he sort of came back with Rocky Balboa. So he always knew what to sort of pull out, card out of his sleeve to sort of give him that sort of leg up, and he's maintained that sort of success really with things like The Expendables and The Escape Plan. Obviously the first one, they've made sequels to that which aren't very good, but yeah, so Stallone is stuck with it, with the action genre, and it hasn't sort of tried to slow down. I think maybe now he's kind of taking a step back after the last Rambo film.
Thinking about it now, Stallone was much more in charge of his own career because he was a writer, director, and created characters for him, whereas I guess like Schwarzenegger was just a vehicle for other people's visions, like Cameron in The Terminator. I guess to a certain extent, like he didn't have the same sort of, I think, I'm trying to think of other iconic Schwarzenegger characters other than just those sort of standalone movies like Commando and The Running Man, that were just vehicles for him, but they weren't necessarily enduring characters per se.
No, he never really had a sort of specific character that would define. The Terminator sort of defined who he was, and we'd always be famous for that. But it wasn't like for for Stallone, he had Rocky and Rambo, so they all had both had sequels. But still, Arnold had, also with Arnold, he worked best under really good directors. If he had a director that wasn't really good at dealing with him, you'd often get a very kind of stiff performance, or be kind of wouldn't quite gel overall. But I think with Stallone, because in being a director as well, he kind of knew what his strengths were, and he also kind of always delivered on that. Also, there's kind of other roles which he's played which didn't quite work, but Arnold, they're always kind of what's the word, high concept kind of movies he did. I mean, you got The Running Man, you got Predator. I mean, Predator is one of his best movies, I think. He plays also his character called Dutch, where it's not really a character that is kind of endearing sort of character once kind of come back and return somewhere else. It's just Arnold really, being trying to take the role very seriously. I think actually one of his better dramatic performances at the time. And then he sort of, lampooned himself and the genre in Last Action Hero. And then he did like Eraser, which was kind of okay kind of action film, but that was kind of the last of his big successful movies.
I mean, you're somewhat of an expert now, I guess, or more so. You have directed In Search of the Last Action Heroes, which you premiered at the Castle Cinema December 18th, 2019. And like, how do you actually become involved with this sort of project?
Well, it was very early on in 2018. I met a gentleman called Robin Block who runs Creative VC, which is a company that sort of helped crowdfund these projects and produce them. Robin had been following my work for a long time. He'd been a patron of mine, and he'd sort of wanted to sort of meet up with me, sort of discuss some sort of ideas about sort of future projects. Because Robin had come from TV and had done documentary filmmaking for a number of years, but he'd kind of had to change a career, and he wasn't very happy with it and wanted to get back into that world. And he said to me, "Look, let's do something. Let's do some sort of this," because he'd seen my Superman 4 documentary called The Man of Steel and Glass, or Glass and Steel, about the shooting locations of Superman 4, and he's really impressed by that. He thought it was like very much like a TV kind of level of quality, but he wanted to sort of expand it to feature length, something of that nature. And I said to him, let's do something on the 80s action or 90s action, because that seemed to be the most popular sort of genre and sort of topic on my channel. So we said, okay, well, let's sort of get this idea on paper and sort of see how it goes and see if we can create a structure around it. And then during the sort of crowdfunding process, we had a writer called Timon Singh come on board, who had written a book called Born to Be Bad, which was basically about the action 80s action stars or villains of those movies who he interviewed, and he had all his contacts with them. So it kind of made it easier for us to sort of get things going and trying to get people involved. And it, we had two sort of crowdfunding promotions, one for Kickstarter, then Indiegogo, and we raised nearly £100,000, and which was wonderful. But also the cost of making a feature film in terms of legal costs, insurance, fair use, and fulfillment eats up quite a lot of that budget, which, you always kind of think, you just want to account for those sort of things. Think, oh, okay, we should be covered. And you're like, whoa, that's actually a lot more than we'd sort of estimated. But we did it. We got it through and got it done. And the process of that was seeing how the genre had evolved from, it kind of changed a little bit during the process, but it was really about the story I wanted to tell was how the action genre had changed from the start, really in the 50s with the westerns, and worked its way through the Bond films and the spy and espionage movies of the sort of 70s, the gritty thrillers, come the 80s where you had Rambo and Terminator and so forth, and then come the 90s where things were shifting to appeal to younger kids. So you had things like Street Fighter or action movies that were trying to, they were no longer 18 rated, where you had Total Recall, which was $100 million budget movie, or maybe probably about 60, 70, but they spent so much on advertising on that film. But that was an 18 rated movie. You wouldn't imagine seeing, like now, the Rock, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson being in some sci-fi movie that was 18 rated. Now it cost like $100 million. No way would you see that today. So that was, I thought, was always interesting, where come the 90s, the action movies started to be 15 rated, then they went down to 12. So they had to appeal to a wider audience, maybe because the audience was kind of shrinking, because the action genre now is kind of more of a niche, but it's also, they call it, it's like a bleed of it, like a genre bleed, where you've got action in science fiction movies, you've got action in fantasy movies, so you can't sort of pinpoint, like the Marvel movies are action movies, but then you don't really put them in that category. You put John Wick in that category of action movies, but Marvel's kind of is everything. So throughout the documentary, we had to sort of pick and choose what we felt was part of that genre. So the story sort of goes from the rise and sort of the success of the genre in the 80s, and this kind of downward spiral come the late 90s, that we saw Stallone and Arnold begin to lose their momentum and popularity, and then they sort of come back again.
And when you interviewed the actors and directors and writers responsible for some of the biggest Hollywood action films of the 1980s, what was the most eye-opening part for you interviewing those filmmakers?
My friend Timon Singh had the most fun job really of doing that, because 80% were interviewed at time and had kind of taken on that responsibility because he'd written the book and had these working relationships with these people. And he was one we flew out to LA to do those interviews and sort of and get them done, which was kind of fine by me really, because he had that experience to sort of speed through those things. And I interviewed a number of people in the UK. So, I think what was interesting is that when you see, obviously I saw, the entire interviews anyway, when I got the rushes, as it were. So you see things like Zach Penn, the writer of Ready Player One, and Last Action Hero, and Graham Yost, the writer of Speed, for example. They are extremely knowledgeable on the genre and pop culture. They really know their stuff. If it's like for Timon, because he loved the genre, once he can sort of talk about something that's slightly geeky, they will like open up and go, oh my God, and start talking about the same thing, the same level. So not feel like restrained in a way to sort of hold back and just give you the sort of the usual spiel. They were open to talk about what they loved about the past and what they feel things work today and don't work today. Speaking to Brad Fiedel, the composer of The Terminator, was sort of hearing his kind of experience that he didn't like action movies. He's not a fan of them. So I had to sort of shift the line of questioning to sort of be more about the process of composing the music. And I got to sort of, discuss other things with him, like Johnny Mnemonic and working on Terminator 2 3D, the ride thing. So things that I knew that probably wouldn't make the documentary ultimately, but for me as a fan of his work, I was like, right, I can now have this opportunity to sort of grill him on my sort of geeky sort of thoughts on these other films.
And what kind of fascinates me about it is there's a very real human element to meeting actors like Bill Duke and Eric Roberts that have played larger-than-life characters on screen, but they're getting up there in age. So it must be quite something to sort of start unpicking that myth of these sort of like screen icons and these characters, but then actually get the opportunity to sort of interview them, or as you say, like watch them being sort of like interviewed on screen. And was there anything from them as sort of like people that really sort of fascinated you?
Some of the actors and particularly writers were very open about their dealings in the past, how they've made these movies. Obviously, as many of them, if you're a fan of a particular film and you speak to an actor and you go, oh my God, what was it like working on that film? Often for them, it was just a job. It wasn't this kind of, they didn't know the film was going to be popular. So it's things like Stephen E. D'Souza, the writer of Die Hard, he's like a talking machine. He was talk at top speed about everything. And he, interviews, like original interviews, like 90 minutes long. And he was talking about Judge Dredd and how, the film was written to be PG. The director, PG-13, the director, Danny Cannon, was shooting an R-rated, 18-rated Judge Dredd film. And they saw the rushes and like, oh my God, you can't do this. So Stephen was so open about like the process of like writing and dealing with the studios and dealing with especially the MPAA, which is basically the BBFC equivalent, where Judge Dredd was submitted to be rated. It was given an X rating, so that's that is beyond 18, I suppose. And then they cut it again. It's still X rated. Then they had to do some more trimming to get it down to be an R. And he was open as well about the deals they did, where they had all these toys done for Judge Dredd for the Stallone movie, and they all panicked and just went, no, we can't be involved and promote this film because of the sort of the level of violence. But what we got, at the end of the day, was a film that was kind of cut down and wasn't as violent as we wanted it to be, because Judge Dredd, from 2000 AD comics, was really violent. So I would love to one day see this kind of work print of the Stallone Judge Dredd that's got all the gore in it, because apparently they'd built Jürgen Prochnow, the one of the guys who's in like one of the bad guys, and he gets his arms pulled apart by this robot in the film. And in the film, you see his arms get extended, and then it cuts to like a bit of blood falling on the robot's feet. But they actually built like this kind of robotic, like a replica of Prochnow, and he gets pulled apart on camera, and you see it. So I was like, wow, man, I'd love to see that, even though it might be really gross, but still, it's also how you approach these people, how you talk to them as well. If you're Timon had a really good skill at getting them to open up and be kind of relaxed and talk about what they loved about these movies and how they sort of look upon the past and how they view the action genre now. Most of them, prefer how films were shot and made back then, and structurally, and with characters. Nowadays, Bill Duke had really cleverly pointed out that a lot of films today that you see the hero, you don't really care about them. And back then, you're concerned about the hero, you didn't want them to get shot. It's like when you watch Aliens, you don't want these characters to get killed off. I was like, when I was younger, seeing Bill Paxton get pulled underground by the alien, I was like, no, you can't have him die. So it seemed like come Alien 3 and they've killed off Hicks as well, so just carelessly. So that really annoyed me. But there's always, with all these interviews, it's just seeing people kind of talk about their past in a sort of loving and caring way, and obviously being honest about it, that not everything they did was successful, but it was also interesting seeing them talk about nostalgia, but not so like from this kind of fan's perspective. It was very much done in terms of like, this works then, but does it still work now? But it's for us to decide. I suppose the fan to decide if it still works. And these films like Predator, Terminator, maybe not Commando. Commando's quite cheesy, but it's still fun. But I'd say Predator and the Terminator and Aliens are probably still like the biggest highlights of the 80s action genre that still work extremely well today.
I also think with those sort of films, because I was thinking there is sort of like a nexus point between practical effects and sort of digital effects. And also I was watching your No Escape video as well recently. You sort of break it down and say they were using sort of like models and mats and sort of digital effects. And also what surprised me actually just watching that retrospective video as well was just like the sheer scale of it. I think it shot for 20 million, but just the amount of extras, like sets and props they sort of built, they just seem to be in terms of just sheer production value, physical production value rather than sort of like CGI back then, that they really had to go to more extreme lengths to put those sort of worlds on screen. Whereas now, and not taking anything away from digital artists and that sort of stuff, but it definitely seems to have sort of swayed more into the sort of uncanny valley of things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the time, they had to shoot, within camera, do it practically. That's always been the sort of argument, you'd have with, the sort of love of these movies in the past, because they did things for real for the most part. Obviously, when it came to doing stuff they couldn't do within camera with optical effects and blue screen, it wasn't quite as good as it is now, because you've got the analog chemical process of doing these things. So, when you see things like No Escape, where you've got all those extras, nowadays they just comp in these kind of digital, all these characters in the background, sort of copy and paste them. But seeing that, things blow up and done within cameras is always far more exciting than seeing a digital representation of it, because you know it's digital when you see them blow up a miniature and it's shot well, the scale of it's done really well. When you watch like Independence Day or whatever, and you see a building blow up, it's far more satisfying seeing a miniature blow up than something done within the computer. And, there's films where you think, oh my God, they didn't actually use CGI. They actually used miniatures. Like if you watch like The Matrix, the third one, they attack the human base underground, and then you see all these miniatures going to smash to the ground and stuff. So it's always quite exciting seeing that. I mean, it's like the Star Wars prequels as well, where most people think it's all CGI, but there's a lot of miniatures in that film, which are kind of, you don't actually know, you're completely unaware of. So the beauty of those kind of old school movies, and why we still like going back to them, is seeing those action sequences, for example, is because they've used in-camera stuff and they've used miniatures, because it's text. It's there. It feels like it's there. It's got the grain to it and stuff, and it's how it's lit. When you see things, with the 90s though, with CGI, where you had that kind of, they started abusing it a bit too much. You could tell it didn't look real, but I think Terminator 2 was kind of it shows you that evolutionary step of how CGI was going to be then taking over. Then we had Jurassic Park and so forth. With T2, you've got the in-camera effects, you've got the front projection, you've got the miniatures, but you've also got CGI used in with the T1000. So it's used sparingly and at the right time, and not just used because they can afford to use it.
And also, I just sort of like wonder, just in terms of just you shooting your first documentary feature and having made of all those retrospective videos where you go into sort of like, production history. And I just wondered, in terms of when you were making this, did you use that sort of experience going in? Say, if you sort of ran into a certain problem, you could think back to some of the many retrospective videos you sort of made and go, oh, right, so it's kind of like this. And then if I do that, then it'll kind of work out.
I suppose so. I suppose so, Tom. It was. I suppose tackling it in the edit made it easier for me, because I then already had, like 8 years experience with cutting my voiceover to clips. So I knew then how to represent the clip when people are talking, and working things out structurally made it easier. I had a great co-editor as well, Michael Peristeris, who was a fan of my work, and he'd reached out, and he told me he'd done all these, worked on these commercials and stuff, and he was a massive fan of the genre, and he knew more about the kind of early 80s action movies than I did. Like he knows Mad Max stuff and Chuck Norris. So I was like, great, okay. Well, then he knew my style of editing as well, so he knew how to copy me, and he sort of structured the first act of the documentary, and I kind of took it over from the sort of, because it goes in a timeline, so 85 onwards, no, it was 86 onwards, I sort of took over. Yeah, I mean, it's a slightly different beast, so to speak, from the retrospectives, because it's me telling this story, but in the documentary, it's the talent, it's the actors, the writers, directors telling the story, not me. I'm just directing it. And there was some people who were a bit annoyed that I wasn't in it. I was like, oh, bless them. But it's often the case is directors don't often appear in their in their documentaries about something else, which I do plan to make another documentary later this year. So that would probably feature me in it. But it's with this one, I thought it was best wise to sort of, if you want this to sell, to a wider audience. I'm still kind of niche, really, on YouTube. I don't have 1 million plus subscribers, whatever. So you have to sort of sell it on these people that are in this documentary, and not me, where someone's going, "Who's that?" So yeah, that was a sort of creative choice.
Well, just sort of drawing upon that in terms of your sort of like presenting sort of style, having watched your content for many years and seen you in front of the camera, was there anybody that you sort of looked up to or took inspiration from in terms of presenting?
Well, I'd always watched sort of, I grew up watching BBC documentaries and programs, so it was always kind of, that was the approach, I suppose. Most people sort of compare my sort of way of voiceover and talking to camera, and especially when I've got an auto cue, I like using the auto cue, is Barry Norman, is the BBC film show. So if you watch the Superman 4 documentary I did, it's kind of a bit like that with my sort of delivery and voiceover as well. So I suppose it creates a different, I suppose lets the viewer know it's a bit more comfortable approach, sort of a calmer delivery that you're kind of learning. Some people said, at one point, people said I sound like I was doing the news, but it's different to how the Americans do it. The Americans can often be like very sort of, always very confident and very shouting and like being over enthusiastic to a degree, like they're selling you a product. So my approach was a bit more kind of in line with what I saw with Barry Norman and sort of documentaries in general.
I mean, that's something I actually picked up on, because I was going to say, in terms of your sort of style, it seems like sort of you're hosting sort of a mid-90s sort of like film show, and Barry Norman would be the person that I would sort of equate that to. And I just think, we sort of spoke about it briefly, but do you think people are kind of missing that sort of like warm and knowledgeable style? Because you don't often see it now, because if you look at YouTube channels, it's either just people just shouting and being very, very angry, or them having some sort of like political axe to grind.
I definitely think on TV, I've noticed a huge kind of shift of, especially in terms of focusing on film. If you look at the BBC 4 would be a prime example of what that sort of BBC's lacking in terms of variety, because there's BBC 4, they have wonderful sort of music documentaries, endless amounts of them, and I've watched them. But also, it must be some sort of deal the BBC had with the sort of radio, with the licensing of music for the radio. They can use these songs for maybe a cheaper price. But there's a lack of film documentaries, and Mark Kermode had the sort of Secrets of Cinema stuff. I think he did. That was like 4 or 5 episodes he did, and he did a couple of specials, which are very interesting, and I enjoyed those. But if you go on YouTube, you can find tons of sort of programs from the 90s that dealt with film. There's loads of stuff. There's absolutely tons of it, and it's a shame that they don't really see that as a sort of, of interest to the audience, which is stupid, really, because everyone watches film, and people are going to be just as likely interested in the making of a movie or talking about it in general than music. It's a similar fan base, but in terms of YouTube and stuff, I think YouTube itself is dominated by an American market and those personalities, and sometimes for very good reason, because they can be very good, but also the UK is tiny in that comparison in terms of my audience as well is 75% American, and and the rest is kind of England, Australia, and other sort of English speaking parts of the world, where obviously I think at places like Germany and Japan, people that do know English and do watch it. Yeah, it's hard to know if on the YouTube platform there is this kind of need for sort of more of a warmer sort of approach to doing stuff in a more traditional way. But I think there is kind of, in the retro gaming scene, there's kind of more of a push for that, because it's more a relaxed affair, talking about video games or repairing computers of the past. But with movies, it's more like, if it's a new movie, it's got to be sharp, quick delivery, and tell people, is a movie good or not, in a short space of time, as people want generally. So I've noticed that with my stuff, if I do a retrospective, which is like 30 minutes long, I'll try and make sure that a review on a new movie is 10 minutes or less. So because people don't want spoilers, they just want to know if that movie is good or not. Are they going to waste their money that weekend? But even if you tell them it's rubbish, they'll still go see it anyway, then tell you you're wrong. So, that's what happens.
In terms of your style of reviewing, it doesn't get caught up in, for want about the sort of bullshit, because recently the Birds of Prey movie's come out and they've said it's a feminist movie. They say that the Black Mask is a misogynist, and there's all sorts of sort of invective language to do around sort of identity politics. And the same thing could be said of like Bad Boys 3, that in terms of some of the content that could be seen as sort of problematic. But when I watch your stuff, you seem to nimbly sort of sidestep that and literally say, does the story work? What's the execution like? And did I enjoy myself at the cinema and not get caught up in the sort of like hoopla and marketing around that, which I think is it's very easy to get sort of like sucked into that sort of side of identity politics, because you're just going to, by nature of it, just get a lot more views and a lot more sort of positive and negativity thrown at you, just simply for where you sort of stand on that. But to me, you seem to have a bit more of a sort of centralist, I guess, like for want of a better word, a normal cinema goer sort of like take on those particular films. And I just wondered if that's something you'd sort of actively done, or that's just naturally how your sort of content sort of fell.
I never go out my way to throw politics or what is the current discussion about a particular movie because a certain side of the internet think a film is woke or pushing a feminist agenda or, a right-wing agenda or left-wing agenda. It's more about, as you say, it's kind of like, does this film work for me as a story? Are the performances good? And did it entertain me? I'm not concerned if this person's being cast because they're black. It's not an issue for me. But also you could play that card to guarantee, I suppose not guarantee, sort of play the game of getting more views, but then you just end up with attracting a sort of audience that are, I suppose, quite very vocal in a way to sort of attack you for things that you haven't said, or take things out of context to make a point. You could review a movie that is politically difficult, in terms of how people are reacting to it at the time, and you just say, I enjoyed this movie for these reasons, and it's a fair and just review, but they sort of, because you hadn't mentioned what's being discussed in the news, then you are, the review's kind of downvoted and people hate you. You think, well, that's a bit stupid. I couldn't hate a critic for saying something like that's not politically slightly off, or, for example, like, if Mark Commode or Robbie Collins say they don't like a particular movie, I'm suddenly not going to say I don't like them anymore. I'll just be like, well, I just disagree with it. It's fine. It's great. Move on and listen to their next review. So I've always made this sort of conscious effort to sort of not step my toe into politics. First of all, because I'm not an expert in politics. I'm kind of left leaning individual, but I don't go beating my drum on social media to sort of push my thoughts, because I never studied politics, so you only see it through the news and what you learn from other people. So I don't make any claims to be an expert. And there's a lot of people that go online claim to be an expert when they haven't. They've just been influenced by another influencer. So you just have to sort of pick and choose who you should listen to, really. Let the experts talk about it, really, not some random Joe who's been sort of vox popping, going, "Oh, I don't like these people," and just and that's it, So it's I think there is a place for movies and politics, certainly, and obviously because if the movie itself is dealing with politics and making a point that's going to either please or anger a certain audience, it should be discussed in the context of that review, but it shouldn't be oneself pushing one's political agenda on people in the course of just reviewing a movie. It should just be, is the movie entertaining? Is the cast good? Is the story good? Does it live up to expectations? And for me, that should be it.
And I think what's nice about your retrospectives that you do, because some of the movies you're reviewing are like 30 years like past, so in a way they're not sort of like current. So you can literally judge that movie almost in a sort of like apolitical scenario, because the current themes or trends running through that aren't as current. So you can take it, more as a film of what it is rather than what it represents within the particular time that it's been created. So I think that's sort of nice where you can sort of step back and also just think about the production of a film. One of the films I'm sort of looking forward to this year from a technical standpoint, rather than a story one, is the new Top Gun film, Top Gun Maverick. It's going to be the best aerial photography that you've ever seen, irrespective of the story. And that's why I'm sort of fascinated to go along and actually watch that movie. And I just wonder what your thoughts were about that, about sort of enjoying films for the more sort of technical aspects.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's certain films where, I know, like for example, Dunkirk, it wasn't something I was going to be like, I have to know about this story. It was more about, like, it's Christopher Nolan. He's shooting it in 70 millimeter. He's shooting it in IMAX. I'm like, I am going to see that on the big screen. You just can't, you can't miss that. Like Top Gun 2, it's going to be shot on large format film. So on a technical standpoint, it's going to be just like, jaw dropping, because, Tom Cruise doesn't like CGI that much. He likes doing things within camera. We've seen that Mission Impossible. He's done things which he goes above and beyond what an actor should do, and a stuntman should be taking over, but he doesn't. Does it himself in majority of cases, which is wonderful. So I know Top Gun is going to certainly look stunning. Like the first film by Tony Scott is a great looking movie, and it's got wonderful music, and it's kind of a bit thin on plot, but Top Gun 2 hopefully has more plot, having really something there to sort of keep you engaged, not just be like eye-popping visuals. But I think as it's been so long, hopefully they've got something that's kind of really worth to sort of bring you back into the world of Top Gun. But yeah, that is one movie that I'm desperate to see on a big screen, because the guy directed Tron Legacy, which was, again, a film you had to see on the big screen because it was visually stunning, and it had that amazing score by Daft Punk. And again, that has like a bit of a flimsy story as well, but it's a film I still love to watch just because of its technical achievements.
And you've often spoken about in your retrospective videos watching a film with an audience or friends. So for you, how important is the communal aspect of cinema?
I think it's very important, especially with horror. Horror is great to watch with an audience. Sometimes you get the wrong audience with you. If you go see it on like a Friday night, 9:00 showing, if you're in London or something, you're going to get people just talking, playing around their phones. It just drives you nuts. But most cases is to get that audience reaction when something really sort of terrifying happens, and it's great to sort of be there. And same with sort of the big blockbusters when something really cool happens. And I remember in like Avengers Endgame, when Captain America picks up Thor's hammer, I was like, oh my god! It's like the nerd inside me was just like, couldn't believe it. And everyone else around me was just like cheering. So it's a bit, like everyone sort of in unison does it all at once. Is quite a cool experience. But I've always watched films in my youth that sort of with friends, and sort of, you weren't at the time, critiquing these movies. You're just kind of reacting to it. And that's why I never thought of myself as a sort of film critic when I sort of jumped into doing this. And when I was a projectionist, we'd preview movies, and I'd talk about it with the other projectionists with me. We would critique it in a way as we got older, but in my youth, it was more just about everyone together sort of enjoying watching, I don't know, like Bloodsport or like Sudden Death or even like, watching Barbed Wire, which was load of toss. But yeah, it's always fun to watch films with friends.
Do you think that in terms of that communal experience, is that where the film really sort of like lives? Because yes, you can watch it on sort of Netflix at home, but to get the true sort of intention of what the filmmaker was going for, that you to make that film really live and breathe how it was intended to, it has to be seen with an audience.
I think all films should be, to a certain degree, seen with an audience. It would be a shame. It would be, harsh of me to say if this particular movie shouldn't have an audience. I think you should always. There's always going to be films that you should see on the big screen. I don't think every film, as films I've missed at the cinema and decided to watch at home with my girlfriend or a friend or whatever, because some films don't really need to be seen on a a massive screen. Like, I know, for example, like Knives Out. I mean, it's not like a film you need to see like on an IMAX screen. You can happily watch it at home. But something like Rise of Skywalker, it's probably best to see that on a massive screen, to take in all the visuals and the music and stuff. So yeah, it's I suppose it's all personal preference. I suppose some people always go to cinema, see all the latest movies come out, and they want to see it on the big screen because they want that experience to be in this kind of dark room with a massive big screen, not just at home on the couch watching it on this kind of flat screen TV.
One of the things you cover on your channel is remastering of films, and you talk about what the filmmakers have done to the sound and picture quality. I mean, why do you feel like remastering a film is important other than just sort of selling more copies?
It's definitely to restore the picture to how it was really supposed to be seen and represented, because as films have been transferred over the years to video, Laserdisc, DVD, and Blu-ray, and so forth, colors have shifted, prints have changed. Whoever's done the mastering at the time hasn't done a particularly good job. So, there's a lot of controversy around, obviously, Terminator 2, and James Cameron remastered that and changed a lot of the colors. So that sort of, upset people. And the case of Batman as well, the Tim Burton one, where it was, if you look at the Blu-ray, then look at the 4K version, there's a lot of teal added to it. And people were saying, oh, this is actually how it's supposed to look, Oliver. I've got copies of it, and 35 millimeter, stills of it, but it didn't actually look how they how it's supposed to look. And I spoke to one of the cameramen, they're like, nope, that's not how it's supposed to look. So studios have gone in and sort of adjusted movies to make it appeal to, I don't know, like younger people. Adding teal makes it more appealing. I don't know. So I think it's important to sort of make sure that films retain the original sort of director of photography's kind of look and the director's choices at the time, not someone who's come on 20 years later and gone, oh, I think that needs some teal. Some films also get changed all the time, and it's subtly, and you're completely unaware. But I've covered movies that that I am very familiar with and thought, oh, that's been changed, and I would love to talk about it. So that's why I've done things like Superman, Batman, and there's things like The Matrix. The Matrix as well, that was all changed with the sequels, where they made the first one they adjusted it so it looked more green, like 2 and 3. But then the Blu-ray came out, the 4K one, they returned it to its original color design, which they kind of zapped out a lot of the green and retained the original 35 millimeter design. So it looks like, when you watch it in 4K, it looks like you're watching film, and that's what it should be.
It's one of my formative movies, the Tim Burton Batman movie. Changed the sound effects and how you A and B them together. And I thought, oh, sure, it can't make that much of a difference, but it really, really does.
It does, doesn't it? It's so bizarre when I heard it, because they did the same on Superman in 2001. They kind of beefed up the effects, like sound effects, explosions, and so forth. But Batman, I think they went a bit too far. Like the gun, it's the gun sound effects, isn't it? Really, that sort of makes you go, oh, that sounds weird. Because it's strange in a way, because they've modernized the guns. I think I put this out in a review, actually. They've modernized the guns in the film. Thus, the guns sound a bit like Batman's technology. Batman's technology is supposed to be quite advanced, but all the gun sound effects sound like from like old 40s movies, which it was supposed to be, because it shows Batman's using advanced technology. They're not. And it made it fit within that universe, where if you modernize all the sound effects, it doesn't actually quite work in an artistic way. That's what they hadn't intended to do at the time. So yeah, it is a weird experience. I mean, you get more bass, you got more kind of, they really improved the surround sound of that film with the Dolby Atmos track. But once you start changing sound effects that sort of create the tapestry of what this film is, it sort of dilutes it.
What it made me appreciate was, in terms of just sort of sound design and also like picture quality, and how people will use different sort of filters and stuff, and how you can have a great, like, I really enjoy the Batman movie, but say if they had sort of had those original sound effects, or they sort of like color timed it sort of like differently, they can really, really throw you out, even though nothing's really sort of changed, but everything's changed.
Yes. But I think the problem lies with that they didn't give you an option. If they just kept the original audio mix for Batman 89 on the disc with the new mix, then it wouldn't be a problem, because people go, well, I don't like this mix, I've listened to the old one. So with color grading as well, I mean, they probably wouldn't do that unless it was like an extended cut that you can go back to the original and see the original version, but how it's supposed to look with its photographic design. But it's always frustrating when they change things up, but then don't give you the option to access what was before. I suppose it's a bit like the Terminator, where the Terminator had this 5.1 surround sound mix, but people loved the original mono track because Terminator was done on the cheap. They couldn't afford Dolby Stereo encoding at the time, so it was all done in mono. But people liked that original audio, but they don't give it to you. They take it away. So it's frustrating as a film fan.
The era of sort of streaming, it seems the days of having large sort of film libraries of stuff that's sort of like out print seems to be kind of on the wane. And I was sort of thinking back in the day when I used to have like Netflix, and they'd send, Love Movies, where they'd send the DVDs through the post, and you could get all sorts of stuff from all over the place, all tight and extreme stuff that you're just not going to get on streaming platforms anymore. And I just wondered, for you, is that sort of like a kind of a concern that even though we've got access to these massive film libraries, that you can't get the more, I guess, like the more obscure, more fringe films that you perhaps were able to?
Well, certainly. I mean, with streaming and stuff, you are getting sort of certain films just won't appear on the platform. We've all had Netflix. We've all still probably subscribed to Netflix, and you saw that particular film on there a year ago. It's now gone. And you're like, well, wait a minute. I thought, for example, like Forrest Gump or something. You're like, oh, I remember that was on Netflix like a year ago. Where's it gone? It's disappeared, because they license these movies for a certain period of time, then they disappear. So people who have got rid of their collections because they obviously run out of space, like most people do, it gets too big, or you're just not interested in keeping all these discs anymore. I think, okay, well, I'm just going to subscribe to Now TV or Netflix or Amazon Prime. Most people don't really subscribe to 3 platforms like that. I mean, I do Now TV and Netflix. So you have this kind of more Warner Brothers stuff and Disney stuff on Now TV, and then Netflix have kind of more, I don't know, I suppose the other studios, that offer content. As a film fan, I would always say to my friends, like, I think most film fans know it's keeping hold of your physical stuff, because they've all experienced that problem of, like, the film was on there, now it's been taken away. And I don't think there's ever going to be one streaming platform that has everything, because it's not. Because each studio wants their own streaming platform, and they all want to compete. For me, I usually upgrade. If I upgrade to like a 4K disc, I always make sure if the Blu-ray I'm replacing, if all the extras have been ported over, if they haven't, I'll keep it, because I may need to use it in future. I've done that before. I've got rid of a disc and think, oh no, all the extras I had in that Blu-ray aren't on the 4K disc. I'm like, oh, I've got to now reacquire it. So yeah, I try and keep hold of everything in terms of my movie collection, but it's a point where I do stop kind of not collecting, but do I really need it? Do I really need that? Am I going to use it in future? With 4K titles, there seems to be a lack of kind of remastering old stuff at the moment. There isn't much on the horizon. What's to look forward to on the platform? So it's mostly new films. So I'm a little bit like, do I really need to buy a new 4K disc of this movie? I'm like, nah, I'll just wait till there's like a remastered of an old classic I want. But yes, as I say, streaming platforms won't hold everything. There's always going to be something that's going to be missing from your favorite collection of movies.
You were saying in the Q&A that you've licensed the biggest independent distributor to distribute your documentary. I mean, how do you sort of like view sort of physical media and sort of streaming? And do you think there's going to be a point where they're not going to be making any more sort of like 4K discs or players, and it just simply is just going to be you have to subscribe to every sort of streaming service to get the kind of content you want?
I think there's always going to be a place for physical media. The studios will still keep making it because they can still make a profit. Obviously that profit's kind of shrinking, but it's not like to the extent where it's like now a dead business. Not at all. There is obviously some manufacturers like Samsung have pulled out of making players. You just have to go buy a player from another brand. But I don't see physical media stopping. We've seen the return of vinyl as well. People love physical stuff. People love seeing those gatefold covers. That's what kind of attracted me to like Laserdisc, where you got like a massive gatefold cover of like GoldenEye or Highlander. It's like amazing when your friends come around and look at it and go, "Wow, this is incredible." I don't see it going away. You will see these kind of prices may rise for those kind of films, and they'll end up providing a little bit more for you to make you buy it, like have more special features, and obviously there's more kind of independent labels. In terms of my scenario, we sold to a distributor, and then they will, because they handle everything worldwide, so on digital platforms, and you can get it on disc through them, but it's MOD, it's like made on demand through on Amazon. So I think it's Amazon.com, I think. So yeah, so it's great that there's always going to be an option to have the digital and the physical. But I mean, some films I'm not particularly fussed about having a physical copy. If I've downloaded it digitally, through iTunes or whatever, then I'm happy to keep it that way. But it's also the point where do you suddenly lose access to it? It's that digital rights management, isn't there? Where it's like video games. That game I bought on a 360. Digitally downloaded it, will I still be able to play that in 10 years, or because the server's been taken away, I can't? Yeah, so it's a difficult one, isn't it, for people who love collecting media? But I don't see it, say, disappearing altogether in terms of film. Maybe with video games, I don't know, with the next generation.
Probably because they'll all be like library based, and then where do you house that? Where does it go, and does it still run?
Oh, exactly. It's like it's massive. Your console's going to have like next generation or the one after that. Your console's going to have like a 10 terabyte hard drive. You know what I mean? It's like I was trying to update the new Call of Duty, and it's like a 100 gigabyte patch. It's a 100 gigabyte patch. Are they mad? And I was just like, I'm not playing that anymore. I'm not going to let that eat up my memory. So I just left it there.
But also you do like a Let's Play series, I've noticed as well, alongside your sort of retrospectives where you play through like more one, and so I can sort of just name off the top of my head. I mean, in terms of sort of like video game and that sort of side of things, I mean, how heavily invested are you into sort of like video games and sort of expanding that alongside? Because as I say, you do cover them in your retrospectives as well.
I grew up with video games, as well, because I was born in 82. So I started playing games in like 89, I think it was, playing an NES or Nintendo. Then I got a Commodore 64, and then Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, then 3DO and Saturn. Yeah, I was a bit obsessed with games. That was my youth, actually. It was video games and movies, and more so with video games, actually, because I just plowed through players' guides and video game magazines and watched everything on TV, like Games Master, Bad Influence, and had Sky TV and watched Games World. So yeah, I know quite a lot about those games at the time, and they sort of stuck with me. So as a hobby, it is a hobby, with playing video games, and I do like talking about them as well. That's why I like including them in my retrospectives and doing Let's Plays on the side, which is just a bit of fun, so I can talk about a particular game like Mortal Kombat or Resident Evil or Street Fighter. So yeah, that's the kind of sort of the fun side of doing stuff for YouTube, where I don't really care about if it gets any views, really. That's not my sort of bread and butter. It's just like, hey, let's do that bit on the side for a bit of fun. But my next documentary I'm planning to do is on a video game series called Street Fighter 2. So that's going to be sort of accumulating and sort of covering a lot of my youth from like 91 to like 94. So that's the sort of the golden era of Street Fighter 2. So that's where I can push my nerdy video game knowledge to the max, I suppose.
So I just kind of had like one final question to sort of wrap up with you. What TV show, film, and video game are you most looking forward to in 2020?
Oh, I suppose 2020 it would be Top Gun 2 in terms of a movie and video game. Oh, that's a tough one, actually. Wait a minute. There's a new Predator game coming out in April. My friend was talking to me about, and I was like, yes, I want to play that. It's on a PS4, isn't it? But I don't know. I haven't seen any footage of it or any other news about it. I was like, that sounds interesting. I want to play that. And TV shows wise, I don't think there's any TV show coming up that I'm just like, need to see. Maybe it's just disappeared out of my mind. I mean, I did like the Toys That Made Us, show. So they did Ninja Turtles and Transformers. I think it was Power Rangers. I think the best video they did was was on wrestling, WWE action figures, or WWF at the time. That was really interesting, despite me having no interest in wrestling. But so yeah, hopefully they'll do another toy series featuring stuff I owned, like, I don't know, Brave Star or Visionaries or something. But no, it wasn't particularly, TV show wide. But yeah, I think Top Gun, maybe 007 out this year, and the Predator game probably.
So there you have it. I had a great time chatting with Oliver. Please do like and subscribe to the show on SoundCloud and YouTube, and drop a comment or two. And you can get in touch with me at the Salmoning01 on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Tom, and I'll catch up with you next episode.